Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Spark Shift Succeed. I am Mel Sodetsi, your host for this morning. Let me start with a question. In a world where AI can write the email, deliver the presentation, analyze the data, and increasingly have the conversation for us, what is left that technology can't replicate? Perhaps it's not another technical skill. Perhaps it is something we've all had along, the ability to connect. Because great communication isn't just about finding the right words, it is about creating trust, reading the room, understanding people, and making ideas matter and moving people to action. And as technology becomes more sophisticated, those distinctly human abilities may become more valuable, not less. That is exactly what we are exploring today. The lost unautomatable skill, why great communication is becoming your greatest competitive advantage as an individual and organization. And we couldn't have a better person to take us into this conversation. Mosidi Modise is a strategic communication specialist with a background in finance, focusing on aligning social impact with business strategy. As a host and moderator for Asset TV South Africa, she has led investment roundtables, masterclasses, conferences, and summits reaching over 20,000 investment professionals locally. With more than 15 years in investment management and consulting, Mosidi has held roles at Allen Gray. Through her firm MOP, she provides strategic communication services and advises on social impact strategies and AI adoption in financial communications. Now, her accolades are many, but we will spend the whole day going through them. So without further ado, allow me to welcome the most incredible Mosidi Modise. Mosidi, over to you.
Melissa, thank you so much for such a warm introduction and a very good morning to everybody. Thank you for giving me 30 minutes of your time this morning to engage you or perhaps entice you on a topic that I have really become passionate about, where we look at this last, what I would like to call the last unautomatable skill, which is the art and science of communication. And, the lens that we have to go to kind of invest in harnessing our abilities to do so in the age of AI. So just to give you a background overview. So when I started my gigs on Asset TV about 2 years ago, moderating panels, I thought my job really was just to ask good questions. So I go through the lengths to prepare, where I read reports, I research the speakers, and I really try to get to the crux of what is the main objective that I want to get, or key outcome that I want to get out of this conversation and the people that I'm entrusted with to hold the conversation with. And what I've come to realize almost 100 plus in-person and virtual conversations later is that the best conversations really are the ones where I ask the smartest questions, but they are the ones where I drive engagement with the people in the room. And I'd like to take you through one of the best conversations to date that I feel I've had through the platform I have at Asset TV. And this conversation was aiming to unpack the key question on how do we shift the perception of Africa being a risk story to actually to be for people to realize that Africa is actually one of the most undervalued investment opportunity. And I had the conversation with Henrik Dutoy, who is the global CEO of 91. We had Alain, who leads a global private markets firm that invest in private equity in Africa and other private markets. We also had Anne Lepile, who is the CEO of MNG Investments in Southern Africa. And then please mind me in correcting that we had Didier, who was actually a researcher on South Africa for the IMF and not the IFC. Also on the panel was Tsepiso from the New Development Bank. And then we had Obaid, who was a manager of the CEO of a sovereign wealth management firm in Morocco. So it was a very diverse panel. And that was put together by design. And what I loved about this conversation is that we moved away from the script. Hendrik is always a good conversation starter because he has this beautiful vantage point leading an international global firm that has its roots in South Africa but is now global. So I started the conversation with him and allowed him to steer it. And what I loved about this conversation was the insights that Alain brought from having boots on the ground, investing in perceived unvestable areas in Africa. Anne was an interesting one whereby she actually took her CEO hat on and delved into her lived experience. And then Didier from the IMF tapped into his knowledge and insights around data of what is happening on the ground when it comes to investment stats on the continent. Tsepiso, championing the New Development Bank, brought amazing insights into what is going on there. And what is interesting about Obaid was that he had traveled 20 hours to come to Johannesburg from Morocco through Paris, now Johannesburg. And we actually unpacked why is that an infrastructure a challenge in Africa that it takes so long to travel there. And there were giggles around many people who almost got divorced doing those trips again and again. And so the crux of the conversation was the crux of it was that the main thing was to unpack this investable opportunity story. But what happened was it became a meaningful conversation where people were tapping into their lived experience and providing insights. And that being said, Anne actually said on LinkedIn that this was one of the best panels she's ever sat on. And for me, what I took away from this was the main objective when you drive a conversation is about giving people a chance to communicate, to make the ideas that they know best land well in a way that is simple and people can take away something from it. So essentially, shifting away from being someone who drives a conversation, but putting on the hat of the master conductor in an orchestra, and everybody has their unique perspective is the violin, it's the cello, it's the piano coming together. So that's the crux of it. Now, if we take a step back of where we find ourselves now, is that we know that AI is here and it's here to stay. And what it's shifting really is that AI has this extraordinary ability to, take what we thought was difficult to put together, which is the information that we need. But it can write our presentation, it can produce the language, it can summarize the report, it can take a complicated idea and turn it into something that sounds incredibly polished. And what I've come to realize as well is that in this world of AI, you have to put an emphasis on not being less on being smart, but being clear. This is where the art of good communication comes in. Being brilliant at your work and being able to make its value understood, those are two different skills. And communication is how that value of the work gets transferred from somebody else. And then one day, so this one thing that I've also realized is that it's not about steering the conversation anymore, but it's about ensuring that the message lands very well and people understand it.
Oh, I see. Oh,
Yes.
okay.
So,
Okay, thank you.
all right. So what I've come to realize is that there's a framework that I have put together, which I would like to call the human advantage. So the human advantage is that, as machines become better at producing information, language, and content, the less valuable those things are becoming differentiators. What's becoming a differentiator is that people must be able to trust you, meaning that can I believe you before the idea is being evaluated. And you need to have the ability to inspire people to say, can you make me see it when a possibility becomes tangible? And then should I choose? Do I actually want to go with you? This is when competence is no longer enough. So just to break down these three principles, when it comes to the trust you, when it comes to the concept of can I trust you, it comes about saying it's about people understanding the value of your message, really. Because before someone decides whether your recommendation is right, they're asking themselves, do I believe this person? And interestingly, I think we often get this wrong. when we're under pressure, we try to sound certain. We want to appear confident. We also want to show that we have the answer. But people, I trust mostly unnecessarily the people who sound the most certain. They're the people who are willing to say, here's what I know, here's what I don't know, and here's the thing that could go wrong. And that's me. And to me, that's completely different from confidence. Then comes the credibility part. So if you're sitting in a boardroom and you tell me everything that I could do right, I could go right, I might think you're selling me something. But if you tell me what could go wrong, before I have to ask you, I start to believe that I understand my risks. And that's trust, not performance, but recognition. So the second one, think of a time when you had a pitch or a client meeting or an investment conversation, or an executive interaction where acknowledging your weakness or risk actually became a strength, or credibility. Someone can trust you with being that vulnerable. So sometimes for people to trust you, remember to also not forget to be vulnerable of what you know or don't know. So when it comes to inspire, and I don't mean inspiration in the motivational speaker sense. I mean, can you make someone see something differently? Can you take a complicated idea and make it understandable? This is one of the things I've learned mostly through moderation. A good moderator isn't trying to be the smartest person in the stage, but it's quite the opposite. The real skill is understanding what each person is particularly good at and asking the questions that ask them to reveal it. And then it goes back to my initial example of that conversation where I became the key composer in an orchestra, realizing that my audience was the key people who need to convey the message were the ones who were playing the different instruments. And sometimes it means noticing that someone hasn't spoken for 10 minutes sometimes and creating that space for them to contribute. And that's all about judgment. And one thing that AI can't do is it can be able to write the script for you, but it can't be able to judge when someone hasn't spoken for 10 minutes. And the last one is choosing. So when it comes to choosing, it's about do I want to go with you? And the key here is to err on the side of, convincing people, being authentic that you are the person to go with, and not trying to be the one who like not over leading with your competence, but leading with your confidence more than anything. And then when it comes to AI, one thing we know for sure is that AI has changed what used to be scarce. Information is now very abundant. Language is now very abundant. Content is very abundant as well. But the human connection, that ability to be able to put people together. You can tell your story about using AI to shape the moderation narratives, but then you don't have to over-explain using AI. And I've had instances, to be honest, where I've fallen short of over-reliance on AI, where I, led with a script instead of actually peeling back on saying, what do I want to get across? How do I leverage AI to prepare? But then how do I give myself sufficient time to be able to land the point across? So in this age where we have abundance of information, abundance of language, abundance of content, I always say to people, don't forget to rely on your own authentic intelligence, the ability to get people to trust you, the ability to get people to choose you based on your vulnerability and your authenticity, leading with your competence, but then also like harnessing your confidence. And also the key is to learn to stop sounding smart, rather on the side of simplicity. And then there's 3 practical steps that I always try to get people to follow when I coach them around communication is what do I want people to feel? What do I need them to understand and do? And what do I need them to do? And this becomes increasingly important in finance, where if any of you are in the room, you are essentially selling complexity. So the key is to stop erring on the side of trying to sound smart when it comes to presentations. Stop, peel away the jargon. We rather add more caveats, rather add analogies for people to understand that which you're trying to get across. And some of the best communicators I've worked with, they can take something incredibly complicated and find one story or one analogy where they can be able to make that concept come alive, where someone says, oh, I get it. Not that that person used impressive words. And then most importantly, where people get to say, okay, I actually finally understand what they're saying. And that the onus of having that ability to communicate doesn't just sit with your business development managers. It actually sits with your call center agent, and then building up a repeatable process to get people to get good at knowing how to kind of land the point across. So the key thing as well that I think it's important to understand is that preparation is very important, and it's something that I feel very strongly about. We often spend an enormous amount of time preparing the deck, but what I can safely say is that AI can prepare a deck for you that is sleek and presentable now in 10 minutes. All you need is a good prompt. So where you need to focus your time on is deciding on what the audience needs to say. So whether it's a pitch or a presentation, try and spend more time asking, what is the real issue here? What does the audience care about? What do they need to believe in the end, and what might they be worried about? And what is that one thing I want them to remember when I'm no longer in the room? I repeat, what is that one thing in the room that I want them to remember the minute I leave the room? So it's about becoming memorable. And memorability comes from simplicity. So, how do you take a very complex message and relay it down to that one or two or three key moment that can be memorable? That is one thing that I would like to leave with you. And then get the reps in. It's all about practice, practice, practice. The reason moderating more than 100 conversations made me more comfortable wasn't because I discovered a magical technique. It's because I discovered what can I learn from one conversation and translate that to another to make it better and go from strength to strength. And how do you become better at handling unexpected, caveats where a conversation drags on to another direction? How do you bring it back in? Record yourself and ask yourself difficult questions. Have the conversation you've been avoiding, and don't be scared to lean into that discomfort of that conversation that didn't go well, and mapping down 3 or 5 things you could have done to make it better, and then perfecting the craft of going from good to great and not being afraid to go at it again and try again. And then the question I want to leave you with is that rather before you craft another communications checklist is ask yourself, what do I need this person to feel? Because communication creates an emotional response, whether it's intended or not. And what do I need them to understand? What is the simplest way I can help them understand it? And then finally, um, what do you need them to do? Because the purpose of communication isn't simply about transferring information. It's about creating movement, changing the mind, humoring people, creating confidence and inspiring action. And in closing, the one thing that won't be automated is perhaps it brings us back to where we started, because much of history information was scarce. We're building technology and it's becoming more and more sophisticated. So the question is no longer, can you produce the answer? It's increasingly about, can you make another human being believe it? How do you go the extra mile to make it authentic, to inspire people, and most importantly, to make your conversations memorable? With that in mind, I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity. And my hope is that you never forget your authentic intelligence in the world of AI, where that the one thing that we can get right is our human ability to communicate and ensure that the skill, that the way we convey a message, can never be automatable. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mosidi. Really appreciate it. What a powerful conversation. Thank you very much. I think we have all been reminded today that communication is happening actually long before we open our mouths, right? It's the silence when someone hasn't contributed in the room, like you said it. It's that moment you can tell a client isn't convinced. It's in the meeting where everyone says, yes, we agree, but you can tell that they don't. And that's the difference between simply communicating and actually connecting. So, what a powerful conversation. And thank you for being with us, Mosidi. Really appreciate your insights. I love the blueprint because whether you're speaking with a colleague or a client or a team or a room full of stakeholders, perhaps the questions is that blueprint, and it's questions we should be asking ourselves. Can I believe you? Can you make me see it? And do I want to go with you? So that's incredible. Thank you very much. I'll jump into the chat. I do have a few questions of my own to ask you. Paul dropped a comment. Paul said, every meaningful conversation with your teams should be related to as a masterful conductor with their orchestra. Everyone bringing their prepared piece with their skill set.
Well
Beautiful,
said, Paul.
beautiful.
Thank you. I will coin that.
I
Wonderful.
think it was
And
more
Paul
you
just
said it than me, but yeah. I've got questions further down, Melissa, if you want, if that helps.
perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Paul. I'll jump into one of his questions. Paul said, speaking skills are some of the hardest skills in the world to achieve. Well, being prepared is so important. And what is the one thing you want them to remember when you leave the room? Musidi, what is the one thing leaders are getting wrong with communication today?
I think it's, in my view, is overcomplicating it. Like what I found in my world of moderating, particularly technical conversations, is people erring on the side of complexity than simplicity. That whole ability to take a very complex concept and tell a story around it, bringing your lived experience, bringing an example is so powerful. And yet it is the most simple thing that everybody tends to forget. And one thing I've realized is if you look at Stephen Bartlett, who runs the podcast, The Diary of the CEO, one of the biggest ones, he always pushes his speakers when they land a technical jargony concept to simplify it. He asks a simple question like, what is that again? He knows what it means, but then he has at the back of my mind, for those who don't know it, the millions of listeners that are viewing his podcast, they might not be familiar with that concept, but he is. So leaders always have to have that at the back of my mind. You need to assume that no one understands what a concept like first loss capital is. Find a way to simplify it. Really, what that means is when you are investing, who is that person that's going to take the risk first? To take the safety cushion. Landed it. Simple as that.
Thank you so much, Musida. I think what we can really take away from what you said just now is that great communication isn't about having all the right words, the intellectual words. It's really about making people feel heard, right? And making your ideas clear when you're landing a message, and also building that credibility you spoke about. And giving people a reason to come to you. So well answered, Musidi. Thank you so much. And Paul, thank you very much for that question. Really, really ties it up very well. I'm going to go back into the chat quickly. I have a comment from Sarah. I think that the balance between being vulnerable and being Uriah Heep is being ever so humble in an obscurentious way is also a lesson to learn incredibly presenting one's own vulnerabilities. I absolutely love the content of this presentation. It is so relevant in today's AI world. Thank you, Musidi.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Before we close, I know we're out of time. I do have a question for you, Musidi. Really, as we listened, and I took some nuggets away from your presentation. I think we've all had that moment where we've walked away from a conversation and thought, I should have said that differently. So my question is, what is the communication mistake you see smart, capable people making most often, and how can we avoid it?
I'll take myself as an example and be incredibly vulnerable. I wish I took 10 more takes on this because I know the conversation gets richer and better and better, and you get to have a sense of ownership. So it's oftentimes not going the 10th extra mile to just find that one nugget that will take the conversation a notch up. Melissa, I'll just be open and vulnerable and just put that to you.
Thank you so much. That's so important. I think everyone on the call today is responsible for presenting something or influencing an idea or communicating it to clients or stakeholders. So that's so impactful. And thank you very much for allowing us to share this conversation with you. Communication is a great asset and AI can't replace it. And that's really the essence of this conversation and presentation today, because even though tech changes the way we work, it's actually valuable to be a great communicator, because tech can't communicate for us when we're in the room. So we do need to read the room, understand the person, and create that genuine human connection. So thank you, Mosidi, for a wonderful conversation. I hope that everybody with us today took some great nuggets. I do have one closing point from Jeff, who said to us, detailed prep mustn't impinge our own authenticity. That is
Yes.
incredible. Jeff, thank you very much for that comment. And with that, we are at 9:30 South African time. And I guess we will all see you again next week, Monday, where we have another world-class speaker. Mosidi, thank you very much for being part of this conversation. And thank you for allowing us to share the stage with you. Impactful nuggets. And I think it's a great way to start Monday. So to everyone, have a great week. Mosidi, thank you so much once again. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.